Hey guys, welcome back to Focused on Fins. I am Eric Smith, and we've got a lot to get into today. We got some off-field fun stuff, some Dolphins talk, and plenty of just league chatter. We'll see where the conversation takes us. As always, it's about keeping things real, keeping it engaging in here. I am not rolling solo. Anthony is here as always to share his perspective and keep the discussion flowing. Plus, we'll be taking some live questions from the chat like we always do. So, jump in, be part of the conversation. Anthony, how you doing today?
Good, buddy. What are we? One day till Thanksgiving?
Yes,
Tomorrow,
sir.
right?
Tomorrow's a big day.
Night shift, man. I don't even know what day it is half the time. But yeah, happy early Thanksgiving to you and everybody out there.
Absolutely. What kind of plans do you have for Thanksgiving?
Uh, well, fun, but my wife and I are actually both pulling overnight. So tomorrow, nothing too crazy. Her family's coming over the following day, so we'll celebrate with everybody on Friday. Tomorrow, I think it'll kind of just be a lazy, family day. How about you?
Yeah, kind of the same. We have my mother-in-law is coming in. Might invite the we have a neighbor next door who just told me that she's not going to with her family for Thanksgiving this year. So probably gonna, send the invite out to her as well to come over and just kind of, chill out, eat some good food, watch a bunch of football, your typical Thanksgiving stuff. Um,
Awesome,
so
awesome. I love that.
one of the things that I wanted to share with our viewers for this week, you and I, we met just before the season started. We started talking. I think it was pretty clear to both of us that me and you get along pretty well. We see things very much the same way. And a couple of weeks ago, like that kind of hit home more than just us talking because I was on Marketplace just messing around, and I found a neat little souvenir, I guess I would call it,
It's a little
and I
collectible.
went ahead
Yep.
and bought it. And I showed it to my wife, and she's like, you're stupid, whatever.
Like
And I
you're a
was like,
grown
you know
man.
what,
What are you doing?
right? But you know, after I thought about it, I'm like, Anthony, he's gonna appreciate that. So I bought these little figurines, 1997 Miami Dolphins. You got on there, you got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you got Dan Marino, you got Tim Bowens, you got OJ McDuffie, and then you got Keith Sims in there as well. And I
Start
sent it to
study.
Anthony, right? And what did you say when I sent it to you?
I said, dude, I have those. And yeah, I have a couple handy here, so it's just to show. There's Marino. I did take him out because as a kid, um, I mean, nothing stayed in the box. So, and
Right?
then
Yeah. So
yeah, good stuff, man. It's fun.
yeah, absolutely. So just another kind of indication that me and you are always on the same wavelength, enjoying the same kind of stuff. Um, as we get viewers hopping in here, as usual, we're going to take questions in the chat. So make sure to put them in there. Going to start out with a question that we had on my YouTube video from last week about the Dolphins offensive line and where I had them graded so far this season. And the question was from Mr. Bryant CM. And his question was, would you prioritize a new right guard or tackle in the draft next year if Austin Jackson stays injury prone? Obviously, we have no way of knowing whether or not Austin Jackson is going to stay injury prone, but he hasn't done anything to show us that it's going to be any different. It's been across multiple schemes, multiple coaching staffs that he's kind of shown that he can't be dependable. So as good of a player as he is when he's on the field, he's just not on the field enough for me. And I do feel that in this offensive system that it's a lot more important to have above average tackles and a center than it is to have guards. I think that if you can fix those three positions, and we've got two out of three now with Patrick Paul and Aaron Brewer. I think if you can find a good right tackle that can stay on the field, then I think you're in a good position to be able to have a little more leniency with the guards. So with that in mind, and we'll get a little bit more into the guard discussion later in this show, but what would you do there? Would you prioritize a guard or a tackle in the draft just based on Austin Jackson?
So I think we touched a little bit on this the last time we talked too. I think it just kind of came up like organically with just him coming back and the injuries and how Borum has played and that kind of thing. Um, it's interesting because I remember always thinking, could he play guard? He's athletic.
Mhm.
He kind of fits the bill, just the way he looks and the way he moves. Like, it just made sense to me. But somebody that I respect their opinion, very, very high of, Brandon Thorne,
Mhm.
I think addressed that question a few years ago and said that, like, everything that's a weakness for Austin Jackson would be, like, just exposed even more by moving inside the guard. And I will admit that's probably a little bit over my head. I've personally never played the lines, never been coached on, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
everything that I get is I'm learning more from you on that topic, and then everything else is self-taught. But I'm a big advocate for, unless you've done it before, you're not going to have the same kind of opinion and in-depth analysis that somebody that has. I just think there's kind of a cap, unless you've been in the trenches yourself. So long story short, um, I would like to move on from Austin. I just took a quick look at his contract. I think, if he's a post June 1 cut, you can save 11.5 million and it'll only be worth 4.275 dead cap. So for me, yeah, and I like James Daniels. The injury's a freak thing. It has nothing to do with the injury that he came in with. It sucks, but shit happens. I would be perfectly fine bringing back continuing the role with James Daniels, drafting a tackle, and it seems like the top of the draft board it may be available for Miami to do that.
Yeah, and that's a great topic that you bring up with the Brandon Thornton thing, because I remember exactly what you're talking about there. I don't know that I agree completely. 'Cause Austin Jackson did play guard in the past and didn't do well with it, but it was not necessarily in this scheme. I I personally feel like the things that he does well, I in this scheme, I think would translate well as a guard. And the biggest weakness for him, in my opinion, is pass protecting in space. And when you move him to guard, you kind of eliminate that. And one of the better things that he does is to be able to, especially in short areas, to be able to create movement. Like we've seen him on those down blocks on these inside zone and duos, being that guy that moves them. And I do respect Brandon Thorne, and same as you and I don't always have the same opinion. Um, Nothing wrong with that. But I do think that he would be a good option at guard if they went that direction. The price of having his salary and moving that into guard may be another consideration, and whether they would even consider that. And it doesn't necessarily fix the injury issue with him that we've had as well. So there's a lot to go into that, but that's certainly a good thing to consider going into the offseason, depending on what's available, right? As we get into the draft, if we do end up drafting a tackle, then it's a discussion to at least have with Austin Jackson, whether you would, you know, release him or whether you would, work look at converting him into a guard. So we touched on James Daniels a little bit there. Going to get back to him soon, but going to go through the other injury updates that we had. You know, updates on from Coach McDaniel through the week. So Darren Waller, his practice window opens up. I think it's today. I think he said Wednesday, so I think that's today. I don't expect to see him this week versus the Saints. It seems that this staff, when they open up that practice window, it's not the following game; it's the one afterward, and that makes sense. Like you want to give them some time to get in there and practice, and not rush them back into the lineup, especially a player like Waller who is an older player, right? And has had some injury issues in the past and obviously returning from one here. So it makes sense not to have him playing this week. But do you think that, in 2 weeks, right, we get into the Jets and the Steelers? Just quick here, you looking forward to the boost that he brings to the passing game?
Yeah, when we brought him in and all that, I was one of the bigger advocates, for him. Really excited. Tried to stay positive throughout the whole, like, what's going on here? When's this guy going to get on the field? And then obviously I was kind of backed up by that when he broke out against the Jets, and then also, played, what he did against Carolina the following week. Yeah, in Miami right now, it's Waddle or Achane, and everybody else kind of seems to sprinkle in production here and there where it's kind of needed, but you're not getting a ton. Malik Washington's found himself getting in the end zone a couple times. But what Waller brings to the table is unlike anything else that Miami has, and that's a big boost if again they're going to continue to try to fight back into playoff contention.
Absolutely. And then Austin Jackson, we know that his practice window had opened up before the Madrid game. I think that everybody's expecting to see him in uniform against the Saints, and I'm looking forward to that one because I do think that it's a is as well as Borum has played for a reserve tackle. I think we're going to get a boost in the running game with Austin Jackson. Like we just talked about, there's still concerns in the pass pro, but you've been covering up for the right side of the line with that all year. You can continue to do that, but I think you're going to get more in the running game with Austin Jackson. So, quick one there. What are you looking forward to with Jackson returning?
Yeah, the same thing. I've been again another one that's been pretty loud that I really want Miami to run the ball and be consistent. And I think if you can add anything that helps in that territory, you do it. And if the pass pro takes a little bit of a hit, they've kind of found some workarounds with the Brunskill thing and I've seen Achan stick his nose in there and pass pro a little bit, so there's a little bit more effort there. There's maybe less mistakes. Obviously at this point you kind of think Ollie's, probably getting a little more acclimated to, where he's got to be, where he's got to have his eyes, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it should be a boost.
And then next one, Andrew Meyer. They said they're expecting that practice window to open up soon. Obviously, we really don't know what we're getting in Andrew Meyer, but this is a player that was an undrafted free agent in 2024, and that the team felt that he was valuable enough to keep him on the active roster the entire 2024 season, even though I don't think he played a single snap last year, and then came back this year. And when Brewer was working through some stuff early in training camp, Andrew Meyer had been lining up there as the starting center. And I have wondered whether once Brewer returned, whether they would explore Meyer at guard a little bit as well. It's not common for reserve offensive linemen in this system to be a one position player. So the natural progression for Meyer from center would be to guard. So hoping to see his window open up soon and maybe see him at least as a reserve soon. And again, we will talk about James Daniels here in a little bit, but do you see Andrew Meyer as possibly being a player that could challenge Cole Strange to play some guard?
It's so tough to know just because, like you said, we've never seen him, on the field really. I totally understand, the center transition to guard. It makes total sense. And then again, when you breadcrumbs, right, like kind of like it feels a lot like the Dante Trader thing, right, where it was like as soon as they got him in the building, it was kind of like we really like this dude. For them to carry him all last year, like you said, that's a really important point. Is that he was on the active roster, and they knew they weren't going to get anything from him. They didn't even want to take a chance of somebody else claiming him. So obviously, they really like him. Again, I would almost defer to you, right? When it comes to that and say, hey, that's going to be your decision. It's do you want to let Cole continue to, settle in and keep 4/5 of the line together? Or do you really want to just say, you know what, that right side hasn't been good enough, quite, not good enough where we feel the need to keep it the way it is or as little change as possible. Let's give this a shot. Let's get Austin back in there. He'll have a vet protecting him and Brewer protecting him. See what the kid, let's see what the kid can do. It can't get worse. You would think, and who knows, and I'll say the last thing too. It's almost sad, but I'm actually excited. When was the last time the Dolphins were getting offensive linemen back in November and December instead of just watching them fall off the roster? And before you know it, you have like 1/5 of your day one starters are still active, so totally different feel for the offensive line this year.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that one of the big things there, I think that these next few weeks, once Austin Jackson returns, is going to be very critical for Cole Strange. If Jackson returns and there is that learning curve of them getting used to each other and we see a drop off in the performance again and it doesn't recover quickly, then I think that that could be where the door opens up for Andrew Meyer or somebody else to challenge Cole Strange as a starter. Uh, but if Jackson comes in and the running game takes off, and that may be where you decide you don't want to rock the boat and just roll for the rest of the season with Cole Strange. As we move forward here, see we got a few people watching now. If you have some questions, put them in the chat. We will we'll stop our topics that we have here and we will answer the questions live as they come in. But moving along, Liam Eichenberg, they said there was no change there. He was injured in training camp and has been kind of a mystery what the injury is. I don't know. Like they're not spending a whole lot on him. He's a vet minimum player. And I kind of wonder at this point in the season, right? And we may have touched on this topic before, right? Obviously, the Dolphins are now, in the hunt, right? When we see those graphics on the TV, but
they're being
not,
generous.
yeah, so not something we're really going to entertain too much. But we're kind of at the point in the season where I think teams start to get a little creative with the way that they use injuries to protect players and to be able to open up roster spots. So when I look at a player like Liam Eichenberg, again, it's not like they're paying him a quality salary, but in terms of salary cap hit, he would only be charged a vet minimum. But at this point in the season, what good would it even do if he was ready to bring him back and take a roster spot? Whereas, I think that we'll start to see some players who get injured and may not really be a season-ending injury, but the team still puts them on IR to protect them for the rest of the season. And when they do that, when you put a player on IR, they no longer count towards that 53. And now you can go out and you can bring another player in and put them on your 53, right? And even though you have a 53-man active roster, you could end up with 60, 70 players that you kind of have control of going into the offseason. So do you have any thoughts on the Liam Eichenberg thing?
No, but that's a good point again too, because I've been kind of thinking that way too, where I at one point I was last week I had gone through like each practice squad just to see who was there and what kind of young guys are sitting out there and available, because again, Miami's scratching and clawing to get back into this thing, but one more loss and it's over. And I think after that, one more loss, you have to just accept it for what it is. They love to try to cling on and not give up on the season. And it's like, I commend them for that, but at the same time too, like we have to live in reality here. And I love that idea. Like, so if you can get away with, with another injury and stashing a guy and putting them on IR, and they can pick up, a couple other guys, throughout the rest of the year and, get a jump on kind of having some extra bodies and talent that you want to evaluate for next year. I'm all for it. And with Liam specifically, I think unless you really need him, just continue to roll with what you got. I didn't even want them to bring Liam back. I'm sure, like most people, maybe it would have been better than what we've had so far this year with Cole Strange and this and that. But I don't know how much. So for me, it's kind of good riddance. Appreciate Liam because I know he busts his ass. He as a just a human level, I get it. It's not his fault. Again, this is Chris Greer that drafted him, moved up for him, be mad at Chris Greer, not Liam. Liam does what he's supposed to do, but he's only so good, So that's kind of how I look at the whole thing.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned there about going through the practice squads of other teams. So let's stay on that topic for a second. Not something that I've done, so I don't really have an opinion there, but
yeah, it's fun.
Yes, you got some names there that stuck out to you that you would like to see the Dolphins maybe kick the tires on?
Yeah, so and I was really kind of doing it with a focus on one position just because most likely Tyreek Hill is not going to be back. So I was kind of looking to say, and again, I'm somebody that's kind of been, I don't know, maybe a little bit louder than others, or not saying it's, in the minority here, because I think it's probably a decent amount of people that would agree and want the same thing. Um, but I've been saying it for a while. Like I want some height. I want some catch radius. I want some guys that can 50-50 ball. Like I want a guy that can run down the field, and take it, run a 9, or run a slot fade, whatever it is.
Yep.
And go up and get the football. Not everything needs to be in stride. So there's a couple names there. Ja'Cory Brooks was somebody that is a little intriguing. He was a Louisville guy. I think he's in Washington. Trayshawn Holden was another receiver. He's an Oregon dude. He's on Dallas's practice squad. And then I think there was a couple other ones, but I'm a little distracted. I don't know if you can hear that, but my dog's barking.
I can hear Griffey
You
out
can hear
there.
that? Yeah, if you want to give me a second, I can run out because he's probably not going to stop. So I'll mute this real quick,
right.
and I'll let you kind of talk and pull up a practice squad.
Yeah, sounds good. So the next topic we're going to get into when Anthony returns is James Daniels. So Mike McDaniel came out this week and he told reporters that he was not certain one way or another whether James Daniels was going to return to game action in 2025, which was, obviously a big disappointment for a lot of fans out there. We've only seen James Daniels play in this offense for 3 regular season games. He was supposed to be kind of the prize free agent pickup this year, and obviously hasn't worked out that as well. So, as we move into there he is, our weekly guest appearance.
Yeah, it's my big scary guard dog.
So just talking about James Daniels and him not returning, or not clear whether or not he's going to return. And this was a player, he's 28 years old currently. He signed a 3-year, $24 million contract. They did add 3 void years on the end of that contract to kind of help with the cap implications. And I think when you typically see that, you see that for players that they intend to extend further, right? You don't do that with a player that you plan on only having for a year or two, because you end, whenever a player like that would get cut, all of those void years get accelerated to the year that they're cut or spread over 2 years. If it's a post June 1st cut, this is a player that they gave 7.255 fully guaranteed, and that was his 2025 salary and his, I think it was $6 million signing bonus. And then if he is on the roster by the 3rd day of the 2026 league year, then his salary next year of 3.48 million, that becomes fully guaranteed as well. And his cap number for 2026 is just under 5 million.
That's what I have up right.
Cutting him, if you wanted to go down the idea of cutting him before June 1st, you have minimal cap savings, like $100,000. If you cut him post June 1st, you do get a little more, right? You get about 3.7. But when you do the post June 1st cut, that dead cap number gets spread over 2 years. So you get a little more immediate relief, but now we're going to be hanging on to it until 2026. And the difference that you're getting is not I don't think you're getting enough money with that cap relief to go out and find another starting guard in free agency. So that's,
Right.
just the kind of stuff that goes through my head. I mean, obviously this year has been very disappointing, but like you talked about earlier, the injury this year, the pec injury, is not the same as what kept him out from last year. So it's not like they misevaluated his recovery from the Achilles last year, and they're seeing that again. It's something completely different, and I think that we were kind of very encouraged about what he was going to do in this offense when we saw him playing in training camp. So for me, I get the disappointment, I get the money we've invested, but I don't want to just throw away that money either, right? We've given him over $7 million. I don't want to make that just for 3 plays. So I would bring him back next year. Not saying I wouldn't still draft somebody, maybe more as a not necessarily a day one starter the way that we saw Jonah, but starting to build up. And this is another topic we'll get into in terms of coaching staff, right? But starting to try to build up that pipeline of linemen that can mature in the system and take over as they come up through. So I would not cut James Daniels. I would bring him back. And this is another one, right? Like if the season is gone, right? Is there any value if you already decided that you're going to bring him back for next year? Is there any value to bringing him back this year and suffering a setback or another injury, or are you, let's say that he could come back by the Bengals game, right? That's 3 games left to go in the season. Um, is there any benefit to bringing him back, or do you just keep him on the shelf, let him fully rehab that injury, and then return to 2026 ready to go? So, what are your thoughts here on James Daniels and that whole situation?
So I think James Daniels, like for me, it's a no-brainer, and I think he brings a lot of value. I don't think the contract is anything crazy. Like you said, I don't think the savings are enough where it's like a no-brainer. This year, like you said, it's disappointing, but that's this year. That has nothing to do with what he could potentially give you next year. He also has the ability to slide inside and play center and play the other guard too. So I mean, having a guy with 3 position flexibility, is vital. I mean, it's you don't get a whole lot of guys that can do that and play all of them most likely at a high level. And I don't think, if Miami ends up 7-7 and he's available, go for it. If, like I said, one more loss for me and it's lights out, so I think if they do lose that game in your hypothetical situation, no, I think you just let him rest up. It is what it is. I don't think you're dying to get him on the field in that situation. You know who he is. There's plenty of years of tape. But yeah, for me, no. And again, too, for a guy like Jonah that's going to have all off season, if they decide maybe there's enough there with Cole Strange, you bring him back. Like, I just think James Daniels is probably a great guy to have too for the younger guys as well. Again, so I think, if you were to make a list, and kind of go, okay, flexibility, leadership, quality, contract, like he checks just about every box. So for me, I really don't see any reason to move on or be so just upset with the situation this year that you're just like, get him out of here. It should happens, but I last thing too, if you bring him back, you walk back in next year with Paul, Jonah, Brewer, and Daniels. And then the question mark can be what we talked about earlier is Austin Jackson. You walk in with 80% of your line ready to go. And, maybe Cole Strange, maybe Andrew Meyer, and maybe you like what Borum did enough that you bring him back. I mean, I'm with you. I want to draft young guys and continue that going until you get some real studs in there. Especially 4th, 5th round if you have 80% of your starters ready to go. But yeah, all that just makes total sense. If you can come back and walk into 2026 with that situation, set up for you.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you bring up about his leadership, and that was one of the things that really impressed me from the very beginning when he was brought in, listening some of the introductory interviews that he did, and just the way that he talked about the way that he worked with the young guys in Pittsburgh. I was really looking forward to him being able to do that here in Miami as well. And he may be doing that behind the scenes. Like, we don't know how much he's been contributing there. But that does kind of bring me to the next topic here, finishing up on the injury side of things, is the impact of these linemen returning, right? So on a NFL 53, you typically have your 5 starting offensive linemen, and then you typically have 3 reserve offensive linemen. And as you bring a player back, somebody's got to leave as well. So right now you have, the 5 starters: Patrick Paul, Jonas Avainai, and Aaron Brewer, Cole Strange, Larry Borum. Your 3 backups on the 53 right now are Brunskill, Kendall Lamb, and Keon Smith. When you bring Austin Jackson back, then Larry Borum moves to one of those reserves, somebody has to drop off, right? So my guess is that's going to be Kendall Lamb, right? You move one tackle down, you move one tackle off the roster. Lamb probably returns on the practice squad, just kind of hanging around. Then Andrew Meyer returns, right? And they've shown that they really like him. Probably is Keon Smith moving off the roster at that point. They have been high on Keon Smith, but Dan Brunskill has established a role for himself in that sixth offensive lineman package. And Keon really didn't do anything with his opportunities earlier.
I think he's a tackle.
Yeah, you go and you cut Keon Smith. I don't think you're getting anybody that's coming in and claiming him. I think that he's going to be an easy one at this point to bring back.
Well, don't say it to Chris Greer. He had people calling about Keon Smith, but
Chris Greer still catching strays. So at that point, right, if you do that, right, then you have Dan Brunskill, you've got Larry Borum, and you have Andrew Meyer as your three reserves. If you do bring James Daniels back or Liam Eichenberg, right, you have to let go of somebody. And who does that become? Because none of those play tackle. So Larry Borum is still safe. Dan Brunskill has kind of established himself as a key piece to the offense right now. And then Andrew Meyer is a player that they have protected for over a year and a half now. So I think that's something to kind of think about there in terms of bringing James Daniels back is you gotta kick somebody else off the roster, and what is the risk of doing that versus the benefit of getting James Daniels back for a couple of games. So any thoughts on that and the depth chart, the roster implications of bringing these guys back?
No, I was actually, when you were talking before, I was kind of going through that too, where I was, thinking like, how many are they typically keeping, on game day, active wise, and then how would you go about it? What's the maneuverability? But then you took it a step further, and even, with having to get rid of somebody and then exposing them to the waiver wire. Again, I don't think it's worth it, not unless, like you said, if you're really in it and you feel like you got a chance to do something playoff wise. You do what you got to do if you got a chance to get in the playoffs, but if any other situation, not worth it. I don't think it's worth exposing Meyer. I don't think it's worth, exposing, maybe not even Cole Strange, just because he spent time. He is like technically a good fit, super young. He was picked, he was picked fairly high. And then actually too, just randomly, I think Sean McVay was being interviewed at the time that Cole Strange was picked, and it seemed like McVay had interest, and it's always stuck in my head that, like, all right, if you saw something there, maybe Dolphins, did a good job, and it was a worthy investment at least to kick the tires. So a little bit of that.
Absolutely. And I remember that as well. I remember him being surprised when the Patriots picked him where they did, and definitely seemed like he had interest. So let's first off, right, viewers, see we got some out there. Questions, put them in there. We will answer those, trying to make this a more interactive thing. We're going to move off the Dolphins for a little bit, and that's kind of relevant. We go into Thanksgiving, and the Dolphins are not playing. They don't usually play on Thanksgiving, but it's kind of a time that everybody gets to see some other teams. So one of the things that we wanted to kind of put out there, Anthony, who are your current Super Bowl predictions? And do you have any dark horses that might kind of come out of left field that you think have a chance at pushing for a championship?
Well, I think right now, I think the best team in football is the Rams. And I think just kind of almost by like process of elimination, like Philly's going to be tough as usual. But I'm not sure I believe in them enough. I think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes there. And AJ Brown's kind of showing that, but I just think there's more. And again, I think it's some of that stuff can be too much to overcome. So I think in the NFC, I would go Rams. I think they can handle anybody, offensively or defensively when they need to. And then the AFC is very tricky because it's a weird year for the AFC. And I saw the graphic for the playoffs, and it almost looks like we went back like 15 years where it was like New England, Indy, Pittsburgh, and You're sitting there looking at it like, is it Peyton Manning, Brady, and Roethlisberger? You know what I mean? Like these guys, it felt funny. Um, but to be honest with you, I still actually expect Kansas City. I think Mahomes is. I was ready for this for Mahomes. I looked at the last 2 years, and he was like sub 30 touchdown passes, and like where it's time here. And then after last year, bad taste in your mouth. Like he needs to let everybody know that he's still here and can still throw 45 of them. So I think when push comes to shove, I think it'll be Kansas City. Um, my dark horse, or I'll say this: if it's not Miami, the two teams that I typically root for are Detroit and Baltimore. So those would be two that I would be, I could see doing it because preseason wise, I think they were picks by a lot of people. There's been some adjustment with some changes at coaching, some injuries. But if you're the team that gets hot at the right time, that's all it takes, man.
Yeah, and that so you bring up Kansas City. I see a lot of kind of how the Patriots used to be like during the middle of Brady's career, where they would start out slow and everybody would count them out, right? And
Hmm.
then you get towards the middle of the season, they're starting to push, and then you get to the end of the season, and there they are.
They get
Maybe
bored.
not a one seed, right? But I think a lot of it, especially like a team like Kansas City, right? There's a big quarterback contract there. You've always got to kind of retool with young players. I think it takes some time to find out where those young players fit in. But as long as you can be, very deep in the hunt, unlike the Dolphins, you just got to make it to the dance. And with the
Yep.
Chiefs right now, they started out 2-3, and now they have been 4-2 over the last 6 games, and they are finally over 500 with that overtime win over the Colts. And I think they're going to finish the regular season strong. I think they're going to be, the same type of tough out that they've always been. For me, I think the two teams that stick out the most, I think the Rams, like you said, have a very, very strong case to be made. Um, and they've proven they can do it in the past as well. The two teams that still stick out to me are Indy and Philly. And a lot of that has to do with they just play a brand of football that it's tough to stop in December, right? If you can't get them off the field offensively and they're able to run and wear you down, those are the type of things that can do it. Obviously, quarterback is a big factor. I think that you have other quarterbacks around the league that can get hot and go on a run, but that's a little more unpredictable, right? Maybe Josh Allen puts on the cape finally. He's tried to, but hasn't really gotten off the ground yet. So it's hard to count him out based on some of the performances he's put together in the past. Same with Lamar Jackson. Um, I think that. Um, like you said, I think the NFC to me feels, or maybe you didn't say this, but the NFC to me feels a lot stronger right now
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
the AFC, right? You got the Rams, the Eagles, like you said. The
I kind of like Seattle too.
Detroit. Yep.
I worry about Darnold a little bit when the lights get really bright. It's my only real issue with them.
Yeah, and then you got Green Bay in there as well. That's now 7-3-1. So there's a lot of strong candidates. The teams that are kind of at the top of the AFC right now with the Patriots and the Broncos. Like I think those are still teams that you just don't know whether they're contenders or pretenders. So and I don't know that you can say anything. If you get into a playoff game and you've got Drake May versus Josh Allen, like I think most people are still going to lean towards the Bills in that matchup. And same idea, right? You get Bo Nix versus Lamar Jackson in a one game takes all type scenario. I think most people are still going to lean Lamar Jackson in that case. So it'll be very interesting to see how the AFC plays out. Would be really nice if the Dolphins were a lot more in that picture because it is wide open, but it is what it is in that sense. So moving on to another non-roster topic, um, Mike McDaniel has seemed to get um, a lot more stable with talks about his job recently. And when you go, what have they been, 3-1 or whatever over the last 4 games? I think that that comes with the territory. I think there's still very much a wide open window as to what can happen, right? If they continue to win and only lose 1 game or 0 games for the rest of the season, I think it's gonna be hard to move on from Mike McDaniel. But if they fall apart and they go 500 over these last 6 games, then it still could be pretty easy. I've said for a long time, like, one of my main concerns with Mike McDaniel is his ability to quirky personality, alpha males, trying to get them to follow through and play hard. But he has proven me wrong over and over again. Like, I have stuck a fork in him multiple times. I'm like, this team's falling apart. This nerd's not going to be able to bring him back. And yet here he goes. He's got these guys playing as hard as ever. There are still frustrations, right? Whether it's clock management or game flow type stuff with him that as we're getting into year 4, you would hope to see some of that being cured. I think was it the last game where they had that false start on Alec Ingold in the first play and then had to take a timeout to avoid a delay game, like just crazy stuff like that can't happen.
Yeah, it's Buffalo. Yeah.
So yeah, Buffalo. So certainly not safe at this point, but where do you see his job security right now?
Are you asking me what my opinion is and what I would do with Mike, or where I think things currently stand?
So let's go with where you think things currently stand, and then you can tell me what you would do with Mike.
um, I'm going to choose to kind of believe what's been put out there, and that's that Ross really wants to keep him because he doesn't want to watch him get a second chance and have it be a home run and wonder what if. Mike has proven he is really smart. He is innovative. There are a lot of good things about Mike. It seems like they have a great working relationship. I really do think he's giving him all of the opportunities in the world to stay. I don't know if it depends on the playoff run or it depends on 9 wins. I'm not sure what the threshold is, what would make, Ross just finally say, okay, I got to cut ties. Like, I mean, if they don't get blown out the rest of the year, maybe that's enough where, he starts the year and he's on a really short leash, and it's kind of the Joe Philbin thing where I think, like, hey, he'll be back next year. But, I mean, after 4 games, if it doesn't look good, like, gone, like, very, very short leash. I don't know if it's going to be we still don't even know what's happening at GM, right? So is it like, have they already talked with Champ and just said, like, hey, Champ, it's going to be your call to evaluate? Are they bringing in another guy and they're going to, ask him for his opinion, or he's going to be forced to take Mike on? It's so complicated, because I mean, they still haven't even technically, like, completed step 1, I mean, maybe they have, maybe it's Champ, but we don't know that yet, so it's really hard from, our shoes, and our point of view to try to hit on that with accuracy. And for myself, I mean, you said it great. Like, you count Mike out, he finds a way a lot to kind of, fight back and be like, yeah, like, I'm still here, but, I'm trying to, because I fall into that trap too sometimes where, he does something and I'm like, God, man, like, he does he makes it hard to get rid of him in a way, and or want to get rid of him. But I think for myself, some of the stuff that I find very important, and that's taking too long to adjust when some things are just, I mean, they're staring you in the face, and again, listen, Mike McDaniel knows more football than I'll ever know, I mean, but again, there's some things that are really easy about the game. at least from my perspective, and he sometimes fails in those situations, and that's bothersome. If your main focus is really just the play calling and the offensive scheme and all that kind of stuff, like, but you can't manage the clock or figure out when to use your timeouts, or I mean, again, for how long are we going to deal with pre-snap penalties and being undisciplined? And some of it, I feel like is just it's unforgivable at this point, considering they were issues in year one and they still are issues now, some of them. It seems like, what, again, like they got rid of some motion stuff so that way Tua can get to the line a little earlier. It's like, yeah, but where was that 2 years ago? Like, or where was that even last year? Like, this is not new, Mike. I mean, the stats have been, staring you in the face, that you take too many negative runs, you get behind the sticks too often, whether it be, self-inflicted penalties, or it's, I mean, you're running east-west outside zone stuff when it's 2nd and 1, like get north and south, So it's things like that I don't know, and I don't have confidence that he'll fix them and be to the point that he'll be like he would be considered a complete head coach at that point. And that's my biggest worry, is those things. And for me, it's I've kind of made up my mind that I do want him gone. But I will say this, whether that's this year, at the end of this year, or the following year after, if they decide to go one more hoorah, with him and Tua kind of leading the charge, um, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that and how the dominoes will fall. I don't need it now because I can be patient. Like, again, I don't need to root for losses in order for it to happen. It'll happen when it happens. So yeah, like, again, I don't know if Mike is the long-term solution. I think he might be more of an offensive coordinator. But again, I'm not all the way to the side where, I mean, again, I'm sharpening my pitchforks and lighting my torches like other people. Same with Tua, for that matter.
Yep. All right. So, kind of closing down here, winding down. I have one last topic here. If we get questions in here, then we'll make sure to answer them as well. But I got a really good question here in email, and it came from Evan Goldenberg. He runs Ultra GM, which it's kind of a fantasy football type
Yep.
thing. But you have you heard of it before?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a really
Pretty neat.
neat product. I encourage you guys to check it out. But he had sent me this question. It's going to be kind of long winded. Going to give you a chance to kind of consume it
My kind
here,
of guy.
and then right. All right. So he reached out. He said, I wanted to get your thoughts on some of what I'm seeing with Brunskill at tight end. The run game has been good the last 4 games, and that does coincide with Brunskill at tight end experiment. The team has been running much better these last 4 games without Brunskill on the field than they are with him at tight end. In 41 carries with Brunskill at tight end, the Dolphins have rushed for 162 yards, or 4.05 yards per carry, with an average EPA per play of negative 0.07, and 54.66% of those runs having a negative EPA. So again, that's with Brunskill on the field. In 68 runs without Brunskill at tight end, the Dolphins have rushed for 423 yards. So that's 6.13 yards per carry. So over 2 yards more, with an average EPA of 0.166. The run game has been substantially better rushing without Brunskill at tight end. And this actually makes sense to me, that being Evan in this system. It seems to me that this run game, even more than most, is based on angles, leverage, speed to the second level, and pulling the defense horizontally. With Brunskill as a big body that provides no receiving threat, he overall hurts with all those things because it just invites more defensive bodies into the box and less defensive hesitation. Run fits seem to get narrower, and I think the style of the run game thrives on widening those run fits. Brunskill isn't really an edge mover, so his lesser mobility gives him less ability to do the things this offense calls from with its tight ends. So I think having him in there actually helps simplify things for the defense with less conflict and hesitation. Can you think of a reason why having him in on some plays makes the run game more effective on those plays than when he's not in? Maybe the defense starts thinking it's more likely pass when he's not in at tight end, which then makes the run game more effective. And he said it's a small sample size, but I think Brunskill might actually be providing some benefit to the pass game in terms of protection, as that small sample size of 14 plays has resulted in 12 of 14 passing for 154 yards, which is 11.8 yards per attempt, and an EPA of 0.75. 11 of those 14 plays were on 1st and 10, and the 3 others were on 2nd down and either 10 or 11 yards to go. Those have included plays of 38, 18, 18, 17, 14, 14, and 14. So it's been exclusively an early down thing to pass with Brunskill on the field. It may be an indication that defenses are assuming that Brunskill at tight end means run, even though run has been notably less successful with him than not having him on the field. So if so, I would expect them to eventually figure it out, right? He closes it out with, let me know if this makes sense to you, or if you have any thoughts. And I did respond to Evan, and I'll share my response on it then as well. But I wanted to give you a quick chance to respond to all of that and give your thoughts, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean that's really good stuff. That's one of those where I think I'd probably like to, probably get in and stare at the numbers and the data and play around with it. Which again, for anybody that doesn't have the NFL Pro thing, it's pretty awesome. There's a lot of good stuff on there. But that's an intriguing one where I'd like to almost get in there and start clicking around with that in mind. But yeah, that would be my initial thought, right? I mean, you bring in an extra lineman who's not necessarily a receiving threat, so you bring an extra guy up in the box. But that's a good thing, right? Because that's when you can get your shot plays, and that's probably why there's only been 14 passes, right? And the chunk of runs, and then you're doing it on 1st and 2nd down, where you're probably getting the more favorable looks because teams are playing your tendency, which you'd have to look and see how often Miami runs the ball on 1st down, how often they run it on 2nd down, and that's why I'm saying I'd like to click around and find out those kind of things. It's kind of like pieces to the puzzle. But it makes a lot of sense. And then as far as that, if teams are not run blitzing you, but they're playing the run, they're not necessarily pinning their ears back and going after you. So their pass rush is, it's not the same as it would be on 3rd down, right? It's a little more cautious or delayed. And then, if you keep the tight end in as well and a running back and all that, you end up with kind of max protection. And then you have Tua at his ultimate comfort level, knowing and feeling like he's going to be protected. And Waddle, matches up pretty well. Route runner, deep ball guy too. I mean, so it all kind of works and makes sense. That's kind of, I think, how Miami's orchestrated their, trying to get their deep passing game going again. And it's kind of worked. I also think too, because somebody had brought up just the, why do they look like this without Tyreek? And I think a big part of it is the fact that teams don't have a whole lot to go off of aside from one Jets game where Tyreek missed time, and they don't necessarily know what a Miami offense looks like when it's not featuring number 10. So again, there's a little bit of that whole surprise element, which is what I think Mike McDaniel had working in the beginning of his tenure. And then teams got used to it, kind of figured it out a little bit, started to make it difficult. And kind of going back to the last question, that's also part of the reason why I think, Mike's a little tough to go to bat for going forward, is I think the adjustment, Mike would almost have to change the dynamic of the offense and how it's run every year to be at his best, where I don't think Mike can make the little adjustments and keep teams guessing with the same personnel, if that makes sense. So hope that kind of satisfied all of that and a little bit of the last one.
Yeah, no, I think you answered a lot of the same way that I did. This offense has been. We've talked a lot about them facing those too high shells, and Mike saying that's the reason they can't throw deep. So they've been desperate to find ways to open up that deeper passing game, and I think that Brunskill, in a way, has done that. When you bring in that extra offensive lineman, and probably a lot of those have a fullback in there as well, if you want to be able to defend that, you've got to bring a safety down in the box. And then, then you're creating more one-on-one opportunities for Jalen Waddle, or, when Darren Waller gets back, we're opening up the seam for him to be able to run down the seam a little bit. And, I think a lot of it does come down to, finding ways to keep the defense off balance with it. It kind of goes back to the idea that you don't necessarily have to run the ball great to open up the passing game. You just have to show a commitment to wanting to do it. And I think that when you bring Brunskill in, right, without even running a play, then you are in a way showing a commitment to running the ball, because you're not bringing Brunskill out because of his receiving threat. But and eventually teams are going to adjust to that a little bit, right? We're going to see the linebackers loosen up a little bit to play those dig zones and stuff like that. And then when that does happen, then you have to be prepared to be willing just to continue to run the ball until they're going to move those linebackers up and bring those safeties down into the box again. So, as always, Anthony, right, this was a lot of fun. That's going to do it for today's episode of Focused on Fins. We covered a lot of ground here, had some fun along the way, even talked some non-Dolphins topics. Big thanks to Anthony for jumping in, sharing his perspective as always. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe, drop a comment, and share your thoughts. We want to keep building this community together. We will be back soon with more Dolphins talk, more league chatter, and of course, if you want to get some questions in there as well. So until next time, stay focused, stay engaged, and as always, stay focused on Fins.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Eric. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.